Everything points to Jesus. Everything points to Jesus, but for whatever reason, we don't see him. We worship our buildings. We worship our artifacts. We worship our history and our traditions. We feel the most religious when we put on our robe and we play our pomp and circumstance and we perform our rituals, but God isn't in them. We miss him because we don't see Jesus for who he is. I don't know if it's because I've slowed down or because I've just started to listen more, but God teaches me things, and those things excite me. That's why when I get up in the pulpit on Sunday morning and I've got one of those things that God has showed me, I can't wait to show it to you. And I want to make sure that you understand it. This past week we saw the tragic news from Paris of the cathedral at Notre Dame going up in flames. In a matter of minutes, nearly 900 years of history was all but gone. I was reading about this week. Construction began on the cathedral in 1163. It took nearly 200 years to complete. I thought our contractor was slow. It was a place of great historical significance. Henry VI of England was made King of France inside Notre Dame in 1431. Napoleon Bonaparte was crowned emperor there in 1804. In 1909, Joan of Arc, who had helped France battle the English and was burned at the stake centuries earlier, was beatified in the cathedral by Pope Pius X. Known for its unmatched Gothic architecture, its great bells, its stained glass windows, and an 800-pipe organ built in the 1700s. Notre Dame was a treasure trove housing priceless and irreplaceable marvels of immense religious, artistic, musical, historical, and architectural value. The cathedral was built using lumber from 52 acres of woods, and so the interior was often referred to as the forest. For almost 900 years, it had survived the elements, it had survived enemy attacks and world wars, but now it was burning to the ground. Though there was no concrete proof, the cathedral also claimed to house great religious artifacts. The crown of thorns that was placed on Jesus' head, a fragment of the nails that were driven into his hands, and a piece of his cross. The news media reported that many people just stood there watching in disbelief, as others were crying in sorrow because this great 900-year-old cathedral was helplessly burning to the ground. But as I watched this unfold, the attachment that people had to this building reminded me of when Jesus was standing before the Jews outside of their temple in Jerusalem. The Jews loved their temple. It wasn't only the center of their worship, but it was also where they found their identity. The temple that stood at this time was the third temple of its kind. You see, the very first temple was commissioned by God in around 1000 BC. It had been the dream of King David to build God a permanent house, but God wouldn't allow David to build it because he was a man of war. So subsequently, the first temple was built by King Solomon, David's son. It was a temple of the united kingdom of Israel and Judah in a golden age of the Hebrew people. But what made it most special was that this temple housed the most sacred artifact, the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence among his people. There was nothing like it. According to the book of Deuteronomy, Solomon's temple became the sole place of Israelite sacrifice, replacing the tabernacle constructed in the Sinai desert under the auspices of Moses. The tabernacle had been where God manifested his presence and assured the people that he was among them. But now God's presence had a permanent structure in which to reside. In 2 Chronicles 7, we're told that when the temple was dedicated, the glory of God moved from the tabernacle, the temporary structure, into the temple. And there God's glory was so evident that even the priests couldn't stand to their feet to minister. Oh, I pray the glory of God would someday descend on us that way. In the tabernacle, it was above the ark that the pillar of smoke sat by day, and the pillar of fire by night. Everyone knew that God was there, and now God's presence was in the temple. But then in 587 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon sieged Jerusalem, and he burned Solomon's temple to the ground. What would you do if your church burned down? It was the passion of the Hebrews to be able to worship God in the temple again. So in 516 BC, a second temple was built. According to 2 Chronicles and the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, Cyrus, the great king of Persia, permitted Jewish exiles to return to the ruins of Jerusalem so they could reconstruct their temple. Ezra the scribe quotes him in Ezra 1:2 saying, "All the kingdoms of the earth has the Lord, the God of heaven, given me, and he has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah." Now that's what the scripture says, and I believe scriptures, but I don't necessarily believe that that's what God told Cyrus. You see, the second temple wasn't nearly as extravagant as the original, but it was a shadow of the first. But more significantly, there was one very important item that was missing: the Ark of the Covenant, this thing that we have replicated behind me. The Ark of the Covenant, the manifestation of God's presence, wasn't there. Although the Bible never tells us what happened to it, secular history records that Jeremiah carried the ark out of Jerusalem to hide it from the Babylonians, but nobody knows for sure. The second temple then degenerated in the hands of Israel's enemies. In 168 BC, Antiochus IV Epiphanes erected a statue of Zeus, king of the Greek gods, in the temple. And his Hellenistic priests began offering pigs as sacrifice, desecrating the altar. Then around 20 BC, as the New Testament era began, the Roman Empire had taken control of the world, and the building was renovated, and it was expanded by Herod the Great, the appointed king of the Jews. Herod was a madman who murdered his own family to gain power. As king of Israel, he was wicked and ruthless. This was the same Herod who had ordered the death of every male child 2 years and under at the time of Christ's birth. But under Herod's direction, the temple was restored. This third version of the temple became known as Herod's temple, but still the Ark of the Covenant was not in it. God was not there. What I'm trying to explain to you is this: God was no longer in the temple. As much as the Hebrews adored their church, God wasn't in their church. He wasn't in their rituals. He wasn't in their ceremonies. For because of their sin, God's glory had departed, and the ark of his covenant was gone. When the first temple disappeared, the glory of God's presence wasn't seen by man ever again. And there is no record of the shimmering, luminous glory of God ever again occupying an earthly building. But then centuries later, as shepherds were keeping watch over their flock by night, they saw the glory of God appear in the nighttime sky. As heaven's angels announced the birth of Jesus, God's glory was returning. The coming of Christ in the flesh was in essence God coming to dwell again with man. The Jews had their temple, they had their religion, they had their rituals and their traditions, but God wasn't in them. If you remember the setting of our text, it was nearly time for the Passover. The temple was teeming with people in preparation for this Hebrew holiday. But when Jesus entered the temple courts, he found men selling cattle and sheep and doves. There were others sitting at tables exchanging money. It was obvious that the temple was no longer the house of God. But it was a house of empty religion, controlled by hypocrites and overrun by profiteers, exploiting what was once a holy place, what was once the place where God's presence dwelt. So the Bible says that Jesus made a whip out of cords. Now, for those of you who have always pictured Jesus as a wimp, for those of you who think that Jesus was a soft-spoken, tender man, for those of you who watch all of the movies and believe that Jesus had his hair fixed and he spoke with a British accent, I want you to take note of what he did here. Jesus made a whip out of cords. He armed himself. He meant business and everybody knew it. And then he drove all of the hypocrites and the profiteers out of the temple court, and he scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And then he shouted, "My house shall be called a house of prayer. But you have made it a den of thieves." The Jews who loved their temple were offended, and they demanded, "What miracle can you show us to prove that you have authority to do what you've just done?" And Jesus said, "Destroy this temple, and I'll raise it again in 3 days." You seeing what Jesus was getting at? Are you listening to his words? Do you understand God is trying to teach you something here this morning that will transform your life? I don't care how long you've been saved. I don't care how many times you've sat in church. I don't even care how many times you have heard this scripture. God's wanting to show you something you haven't seen. Everything points to Jesus. Everything points to Jesus, but for whatever reason, we don't see him. We worship our buildings. We worship our artifacts. We worship our history and our traditions. We feel the most religious when we put on our robe and we play our pomp and circumstance and we perform our rituals, but God isn't in them. We miss him because we don't see Jesus for who he is. Each night during Journey, I told our guests that the Bible is one continuous story. You can't just read the last chapter and get it. You can't just pick it out of a few books and ignore the rest and understand what the Bible is saying. The Bible is one continuous story, but it is made up of many stories told to us in many different ways so that we might understand that everything that it speaks about points only to Jesus. And yet somehow we still miss him. During the Egyptian bondage, for those of you who've been on a journey, review this in your mind. At the first Passover, a spotless lamb of the first year was slaughtered, and its blood was painted over the doorposts of their homes to save them from the death angel. Unleavened bread was made because leaven was a symbol of sin. And wine was poured out. They couldn't understand the significance of what they were doing. They didn't know what was coming in the future. But Jesus was the lamb. Jesus was the unleavened bread, and Jesus was the wine. Because everything pointed to Jesus. The tabernacle stood in the wilderness, but was walled off from the outside so that there was only one entrance through the eastern gate. Inside of the gate was the altar of sacrifice. Just beyond the altar of sacrifice was a laver, and beyond the laver was the tabernacle itself. Inside of the tabernacle were two rooms, the holy place and then the holiest place, where the Ark of the Covenant sat and where God's presence dwelt. The two rooms were separated by a veil which could only be passed one day per year on the Day of Atonement, when the high priest would strip himself down of all of his glory, and he would pass through that inner veil and into the presence of God. Covered in the blood of a sacrificial lamb, he would scatter the blood before the Ark of the Covenant and on the mercy seat to atone for the sins of his people. But even then, they couldn't grasp the fullness of the significance of what they were doing. But what I want you to understand today, church, is this. Before the wilderness tabernacle was ever built, God lifted Moses up into heaven, into his presence, and there God showed Moses the tabernacle of heaven. Moses saw the real deal. He saw the real church. He saw the real tabernacle. He saw the real table of shewbread and the real lampstand and the real Ark of the Covenant. And God told him, now go down and build a replica of what you've seen. What Moses built in the wilderness, though a testament to the ingenuity of man and priceless in cost and detail, was only a cheap copy of the real thing. Everything points to Jesus. Church, Jesus is the tabernacle. Jesus is the eastern gate. Jesus is the veil. Jesus is the high priest who stripped himself down of all of his heavenly glory and took on the form of a man. Jesus is the spotless lamb that was sacrificed for our sins. And Jesus is the Ark of the Covenant where our forgiveness is found. Where's the Ark of the Covenant today? I have it. And if you're a born-again child of God, you have it, and you have it, and you have it, because everything points to Jesus. Are you getting this? Are you understanding it? That was the point that Jesus was trying to make when he sat with the disciples at the Last Supper. It was the Passover, and in their eyes, they were just perpetuating a tradition. It was Passover, and this is what they traditionally did on Passover. The lamb would be slain, the unleavened bread would be made, and the unfermented wine would be served. There would be a meal, and there would be a ritual, and then there would be a celebration. There would be a party. Many of you today will perpetuate a tradition. You're going to go home and have your meal, and you're going to break out chocolate bunnies and give them to your kids. But I want to change your focus, because this is not Easter, it is Resurrection Sunday. The disciples were just perpetuating a tradition. But that night in the upper room, Jesus changed their focus. He opened their eyes to a glorious truth that they never understood before. They'd always looked backward. They'd always remembered history. They followed their traditions. They did what mom and dad did and what grandma and grandpa used to do. But what was once sacred and meaningful had become a lifeless and mundane, a boring ritual. But Jesus was about to bring it all into a new light. The word says that Jesus broke the bread. I'll tell you, every time I looked at this in my notes while I was studying this week, I got excited. Jesus broke the bread. I got excited because I know where this is going. If you know what was coming, you'd be shouting right now. Jesus broke the bread. Immediately, something should have clicked in the disciples' minds. When Jesus broke the bread, their memory should have snapped back to a hillside along the Sea of Galilee, where 15,000 people were gathered to hear Jesus preach. They should have thought about the great miracle that Jesus performed as he took 5 small loaves of bread and 2 small fish and fed the multitude and then took up 12 basketfuls of leftovers. There in the upper room, they should have remembered. They should have remembered Jesus breaking the bread, and they should have remembered that nothing happened that day by the Sea of Galilee with the multitude until what little they had was placed into Jesus' hands. The first thing that we have to do is put whatever we have in Jesus' hands. We typically like to do things ourselves. We'll figure it out. We'll make it happen. We'll make it work. We'll become religious, and we'll go to church, and we'll buy a Bible, and we'll clean up our act a little bit, and we'll save ourselves. But Jesus said, give what you have to me. Give it all to me. Jesus don't need much. He just needs it all. They put what they had in Jesus' hands, and the very first thing Jesus did was thank God for what he had. Jesus thanked God for the what and not enough. He didn't tell God about what he didn't have. He didn't complain to God that the need was greater than the supply. He didn't point out to God how many people were there and how little food he had to work with. But the Bible says that Jesus thanked God for what he had. There's some deep theology in that, church. The supply was inadequate for the need, but now the supply was in God's hands. Oh, you ain't getting this. You ain't getting this, or you wouldn't be sitting still. Churches get into trouble when they try to govern their church like it's a business. Had a pastor write on one of the church accounts the other day. He had a question. He said, I'm a young pastor. We have a growing church. And he said, we need more space, but we can't afford to build. And I said to him, young man, don't tell God what he can afford. Don't tell God what he can afford. Notice that the bread was broken first. Before the need was met, the bread had to be broken first. Jesus said in John 6:35, I'm the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Before any need in our life could be met, Jesus had to die on the cross. The bread had to be broken first. And it's only through him, through the bread of life, that any of our needs can be taken care of. The disciples should have remembered this. There by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus broke the bread, and then he gave the broken bread to his disciples. Then the disciples had to break the broken bread and give it to the leader of each group. And then the leader of each group had to break the bread that had been broken by the disciples, that had been broken by Jesus, and give it to the heads of each family. After that, the heads of each family broke the bread again that had been broken by the heads of the groups, that had been broken by the disciples, that had been broken by Jesus, and give it to their families. That's why when they were finished eating, 12 basketfuls of broken leftovers were taken up. Everything had to be broken. God can only use broken vessels. The bread of life had to be broken first, and then the disciples had to be broken. And you and I have to be broken for God to use us to meet the needs that are around us. We can't be so stiff and so set in our ways and so hard that we refuse to be broken, but we have to be pliable in the Master's hands, and we have to allow God to break us. There are a whole lot of ways for us to be broken. A life trial, a sickness, a marriage troubles, children's problems, financial struggles. God can use anything to break us so he can use us. Jesus didn't change the bread and fish into something else. Sometimes we want to change this message into something else. We want to change this message into something that's more palatable. Well, I know that Jesus was broken, and I understand that the disciples were broken, but I really believe that God wants me to be rich and my life to be problem-free. That's not what Jesus taught. Everyone that serves him must be broken first so that through our brokenness, God can meet the needs that are around us. Everybody ate and everybody was satisfied. Nobody was left out. Nobody went away hungry. If they did, it was their own fault because Jesus provided enough to feed them all. Jesus provided enough for every man, every woman, and every child that was there, and everybody ate and everybody was satisfied. The amount of bread they had didn't matter because he was the sustainer of life and they lacked nothing. That's what Jesus wanted them to learn. It wasn't about feeding people. It wasn't about miracles. It wasn't about bread or fish, but it was about recognizing who Jesus is. He said to them, I am the bread of life, and whoever comes to me will never hunger, and whoever believes in me will never thirst. Church, are you understanding? They're at the Passover in the upper room. Jesus broke the bread. He broke the bread and he gave it to the disciples and he said to them, this is my body, which is broken for you. Now, I don't believe it happened the way that we always portray it. I believe that they stopped what they were doing. I believe they stopped talking, they stopped eating, and the room went eerily silent. What was Jesus talking about? What was he saying? This is my body, which is broken for you? Whatever did he mean? They held the broken bread in their hands. And then Jesus said, take and eat all of it. They were curious. What was he doing to their tradition? Why was Jesus interrupting the Passover like this? And then, to complicate it even more, he took the cup. And he gave it to the disciples and he said, this is my blood which is shed for the forgiveness of sins. I believe they began to lose their appetite. What they were expecting to be a traditional meal was now turning into something strange and grotesque. What did Jesus mean that this was his blood? They sat there stunned at his words, holding the cup in their hands, and then he commanded them, take and drink all of it. They had lost their appetite. In their hands was the unleavened bread and the cup of unfermented wine. They had eaten and drank it many times before, but now it had become something different. They really didn't understand. They wanted to obey Jesus, but what was he asking them to do? But it's what followed this moment that opened their eyes. He said, as often as you do that, from this moment on, do it in remembrance of me. This is all about me. For years, they had worshiped only history and tradition. For years, they had gone to the temple and repeated their rituals. But Jesus explained to them that night, I am the lamb that is slain. I am the bread that is broken. It is my blood that is poured out. It's all about me. The Jews were defending their precious temple. Who was Jesus to come in there and make the mess that he did? What authority do you have, they demanded. And Jesus said to them, destroy this temple and I'll raise it again in 3 days. They laughed at him. It's taken 46 years to build this temple and you say you're going to raise it in 3 days? Their faith was based on a man-made building while the real temple was standing right in front of them. But they didn't recognize him. They were standing in the presence of God. The fake temple was behind them, and the real one was in front of them. The Ark of the Covenant was right before them, but they didn't recognize who he is. Today, many people worship the church building. The furniture has become sacred, so sacred that it can no longer be moved or replaced. Chandeliers have to be as they were in Grandma's day. The stained glass must be artistic and beautiful and cared for in great detail. The organ has to sound majestic. Many worship tradition. Well, this is what we've always done. It's Palm Sunday, so the kids have to walk down the sanctuary aisle carrying palm branches. Lilies have to be set on the altar. It's Easter Sunday, so we have to have a breakfast and wear our Easter outfit and then have a family reunion when we all get home. Then let's give the children candy and hide some eggs and tell them that it's from some imaginary rabbit so they'll be confused as to what Resurrection Sunday is really about. Let's trivialize the most important day in history of the world because that's what we traditionally do. This may offend you, but that stuff makes me sick. The greatest day, the most impactful weekend in the history of our existence has been left by the church. And now, instead of bowing on our knees in gratitude on Good Friday and celebrating our victory on Sunday, we're taking pictures with rabbits and hiding eggs. Shame on the church. What if it was all lost? What would you do if your church burned down? What if by some twist of fate the church burned to the ground? What if we lost all of the pews, the altar was consumed by flames, and everything that we had saved for years was suddenly a pile of ashes? What if the picture that you bought in memory of Mom was destroyed? What if the table that we donated in Grandma's name was destroyed? What if the artifacts were destroyed and the building was gone and there was nothing left but Jesus? Would it make a difference? What would you do if your church burned down? Everything points to Jesus. Everything must point to Jesus. Our faith shouldn't be on a crown of thorns that might have one day sat on Jesus' head, but it should be on the one who wore the crown of thorns. Our faith shouldn't be in the nails or what might have been a piece of the cross, but it should be on the one who was crucified on the cross for our sins. Our faith shouldn't be in an earthly woman that God chose to carry him, but it should be on the one that she carried. And on this Resurrection Sunday, our faith shouldn't even be in an empty tomb, but it ought to be on the one who stepped out of that tomb in victory over sin and death, because it's all about Jesus. When Jesus died on the cross, the veil in Herod's temple that closed off the holiest place from the eyes of men was torn from the top to bottom, meaning that God tore it. God tore it. It was torn from top to bottom, and God revealed to those who had been worshiping the temple that there was nothing inside. The Ark of the Covenant wasn't there. God's presence had never been there. For years they had wasted worshiping nothing but an empty room. 70 years after that day, the very temple that they were standing in front of, Herod's temple, was destroyed. It was looted and vandalized. The artifacts that remained were carried off to Rome, and what was left of their precious temple was burned to the ground, never to rise again. On the site where it sat, a pagan temple was built. What would you do if your church burned down? Never take your eyes off of Jesus. Never take your eyes off of his life, his death, or his resurrection. Meditate on him. Surround your life with him. Sit under teaching and preaching that points toward him. Listen to music and read books that make much of him. Feed your soul a steady diet of the bread of life. Preach Jesus to yourself 1,000 times a day. And then when you lay down at night, rest with Jesus on your mind.